We're going to begin our update period with words from our elected officials who've been asked to keep their updates pertinent, concise, and very informative for you to understand their areas of responsibility and their roles in their respective positions. So we're going to start with Senator Whitver. You have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
There you go. Yep. Well, first of all, I want to thank a few different people or groups. The Chamber, Julie, you and your staff do a tremendous job of these every single year, and so we really appreciate you guys providing this platform to come out and have a conversation with the community. So thank you for that and the sponsors that make it possible. I want to thank the library. This is pretty exciting to be in a new room, and this looks like the perfect place to do these forums, and so I appreciate them hosting us here this year, and hopefully for years to come. And then I want to thank all of you guys for coming out and giving us your feedback on what you're seeing and what you're hearing so that we can take that back to the Capitol when we go back next week. And so at the Capitol right now, we're 2 weeks away from Funnel Week. So we've started the process. This is the time of year where hundreds, if not thousands, of bills are filed. All those bills go through the process of the first three-person subcommittee, then through the committee, and right now it's just a time to vet a lot of those hundreds or thousands of ideas. Not every bill that you read about in the newspaper has any chance, there's some that have no chance of passing, but they're reported on anyway. Some are more priority issues that are focused on, but just because you're reading about a bill doesn't mean it's going to become law here in a couple weeks. Often the media likes to pick out some of the more interesting bills and focus on those. So Funnel Week is 2 weeks away. Funnel Week means a bill to stay alive has to be through a committee on one side of either the Senate or the House. If it does not make it through that funnel, it will be dead for the year. There are some exceptions to that, but overall it's a very important week of the legislative process to kind of funnel down all those thousands of bills into the ones that are going to continue to have conversation. And so really that's a lot of the work going on. We just started debate yesterday, the first time we've had any actual Senate debate on the floor. And that was just a couple of bills, mainly one, it's a supplemental spending bill to provide some flood relief to mostly western Iowa, but the projects that have been determined to be most in need. So we added some at the end of last year, came back, the governor did a study, worked with a board set up to evaluate the flooding, came back and said we really need another $20 million right now to match federal dollars to continue to make progress on the flood issues in Iowa. And so that was the biggest bill we did this week, and next week we'll continue to debate a little, but mostly still subcommittee work. The budget, we're in a very strong position right now in the state of Iowa. We have been very deliberate in our budgeting. We've been fairly conservative in our budgeting to make sure that we have a strong surplus. Right now we have about $800 million in our rainy day account. That's our economic emergency account in case bad times come. We also have a projected $400 million surplus this current budget year we're in. So we're in a strong fiscal position. That doesn't mean we're going to go crazy with spending because economists have been predicting recessions now for 2 or 3 years. And so we want to make sure that we don't have to go back to the days where we're cutting budgets. And so we're in a very strong position. We want to continue to make sure that we stay in a strong position. The governor released her agenda in her State of the State address the second day of session. The biggest newsworthy item out of that is she wants to continue to work on tax reform. So she put out a tax reform bill that includes I-Will. If you guys are not familiar with I-Will, that was voted on by the people in 2010, the 2010 general election, to establish a trust fund for Iowa water, land use, environmental concerns. And that constitutional amendment says the next time the legislature raises the sales tax, 3/8 of that cent will go into the I-Will trust fund for water quality, environmental concerns, etc. In the 10 years since that was voted in by the people to establish that account, we have not raised the sales tax in Iowa, so that has never been funded. So the biggest news out of her speech was she is proposing increasing the sales tax by 1 penny, using 3/8 of that to fund the I-Will trust fund. Use a big chunk of it to reduce our income tax rates, and also work on mental health funding, bringing that off of the property tax rolls and into the state. And so it's a very, very complex issue. one that will take a lot of time. The bill was just filed yesterday or the day before, and so we've known details, but just finally have the bill in front of us. So that will be one that is it's not greased and ready to go. It's going to be a big, lengthy conversation at the Capitol on which parts of that we want to do, if any of it, or all of it. And so there's a lot of discussion to happen there. I would just say anytime we're raising taxes, even if they're offset by something else, there's concern and caution. And so there are a lot of people in our caucus that are very concerned about raising that sales tax. The one thing that I'm really concerned about is right now we have some of the highest property taxes in the entire country. Our income tax rate is still one of the highest in the country. And if we raise our sales tax, now we have one of the highest sales taxes in the country. And that's not a tax environment that we're trying to do. And so unless we're really driving down rates somewhere else to get us really competitive, that's going to be very difficult to raise a sales tax. And so again, that conversation is just starting. The other big issue, I guess I'll highlight, there's a lot on here, but the other one I'll highlight is school supplemental aid. That is the amount of money we give to the schools. We are supposed to do that within the 30 days, first 30 days of session. So that would be February 13th is our 30-day limit. The Senate and the House and the governor have all proposed different amounts for that school supplemental aid. And so we're going through kind of negotiations and conversations on where that should end up. But the proposals range from 2.1% to 2.5%, but again, we need to work that out with the House. So I'll leave the rest for John and Heather to address, but there's plenty more, and I'm looking forward to questions.
Well, thank you, Jack, and thank you all for being here, and what a great facility this is, and what a great statement for our community that we're able to provide this kind of learning center and community center. Is just really a big deal for Ankeny. For those of us that lived here a long time, we saw the expansion of Kirkendall when it was added to the school, and to see this take its place is just amazing, really. I want to tell you this is my 8th year serving in the House of Representatives. 6 years I've been a budget chair. This is the first, last year was actually the first year that I got to appropriate new money. The other years prior to that, I'd been doing de-appropriations. And this year, looks like we're going to be able to do some further appropriation. This will go to help pay the salary and payroll within those departments, as they've been continuing to increase without the adequate funding to pay those. So they've kind of been, I've said this before here, we've been cannibalizing state government, and now we're going to let that expand a little bit as we have the resources to do it. So it's really a different feel at the Capitol this year. As Senator Whitver said, the House has proposed a 2.5% and $94 million increase for public education. On top of that, there's an equalization effort for the schools. There's a disparity between school districts as to how much state supplemental aid they actually get, and we're willing to put in $10 per student to help bring that equalization effort closer to the state median. And we're also doing transportation assistance. That would be another $5 million in the rural school districts where they have lots of transportation expense. That comes out of classroom money. They don't have the money to pay teachers to expand the course offerings, the things that we'd like to see going on in Iowa, and so we're providing another proposing to provide $5.2 million, and that would allow every school district to pay no more than the state median cost of transportation. It won't affect Ankeny so much, but it does affect our other rural school districts right around us, like Bondurant-Farrar, like North Polk, like Ballard. So we're grateful for that. We'll keep working with the Senate. They have a different number and a different take on how we're going to do supplemental aid to the schools, but the good thing is the numbers are all positive. We're working together to achieve what I think is another good, successful funding year for schools. The governor has asked in her State of the State speech for $80 million for mental health. And we in the House have looked at that issue as one that we will and want to address. And we have a little bit different take on it. Rather than just drop $80 million into that discussion and think that it's going to be used wisely, we're looking at $30 million a year for each of 3 years, so that there's time to build up, to get people in place, so that adequate resources are there to meet the need as we ramp up and take care of that mental health crisis here in Iowa. So I'm always willing to get your feedback, and I have some issues that I just wanted to ask about. I think these affect us locally, and I think they're important, and I'd like to get feedback from you as to what your thoughts are on these. So driver's ed has come to the forefront in a discussion in the House, at least in our Transportation Committee, on beginning student drivers. Right now, at age 14, they're eligible to start driving. At 14 and a half, once they've had driver's ed and 20 hours of assisted driving, they can get a drive-alone permit. And there's more and more focus on the fatality number here in Iowa. We just haven't had a year recently that we've been under 300. It's kind of like a jumbo jet crashing right here in Iowa every year, and everybody's lost. And it's just staggering when you look at the numbers, what that really is. And so I would like to know what your thoughts are about raising that age to 15. Some states around us require a 16 age limit before you can drive alone. Very few states have a 14-year limit. Quite a few do have 15. So I'd like to get input on that. Also, I expect that we'll debate a hands-free bill this year. And we've talked about that before, but every year it comes up that it's used for everything. The cell phones are used everything from music to different apps, to do all kinds of things, to driving directions, you name it, it's on it. We just feel that any time that you have a distracted driver, and the Department of Public Safety tells us if it's over 2 seconds, it's worse than drunk driving. So I know from my personal experience, 2 seconds goes by awful fast, and I'm guilty of that. So I'm consciously working not to do that, but it's difficult, and I just would like feedback, what you think from a statewide perspective, if that would be the thing to do. We also passed a bill yesterday in Transportation Committee that would cause the state of Iowa to invest some additional road use tax money to put rumble strips at every paved intersection where they currently don't exist, and we have highway speeds, in other words 55 miles an hour or higher, at that intersection on one of the pavements. We've had a number of fatalities at those intersections. It's hard to describe how someone can just pull out in front of a vehicle, but it continues to happen, and we don't know if it's distracted driving. We don't know if they can't see the stop sign because of placement issues or vehicle issues that are obstructed or something. We don't know. But it's continuing to happen, and we're going to ask that the counties do this too. So it's a substantial increase that's going to, in funding requirements to do this. But I think it's the right thing to do, but I'd like to get your input. And the last thing I will tell you is, if you haven't seen my news articles in the paper, it's not because they're not being written. They're being written, they're being submitted, but the Ankeny Press Citizen seems to have a functionality issue. I'll let Heather expand.
We had a little bit of a conversation about this on the House floor yesterday, just to make sure we were both trying to figure it out. So thank you. Yeah. We'll get into it.
I'll take care of it.
Yeah, thank you. It is not for a lack of effort. There's a lot of folks that are just, a lot of people are not as many staff at the Des Moines Register having to do the same amount of work, if not more, and that workload is apparently making it really difficult to get stuff posted online and to get into the paper. It's frustrating because we obviously, I think I can speak for all of us, want to be getting information out to you on what we're working on. Never mind the fact that I belabor every word that I put into an article, so it literally takes me 2 hours to write it. And if I'm spending that time, I want to know that it's going to get out there. But anyway. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting. I am so excited to finally be in the library, and I'm really, really looking forward to the opportunity to walk around and take a look later. And it was really great opportunity today because I have a book to return, so yay. I also want to make sure that Amy Tagliarini, one of our new school board members, is acknowledged too, because I don't think that she was mentioned before. So thank you, Amy, for being here. And so just a couple of things. I wanted to give a quick update on some education pieces because that is one of my big focuses in the legislature. I serve on the Education Committee, Human Resources, Economic Growth, Environmental Protection, and International Relations, as well as the Economic Development Budget Subcommittee. But far and away, Education and Human Resources are my busiest committees, and there is a lot happening. I've also been told, well, this session feels like we're going at like breakneck speed, and I've been told it's even faster than normal, so I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that, but holy cow, it's overwhelming. So there's a lot moving already. So I'm glad that we've already had school funding brought up as an issue. I just want to mention that, it's always referred to as state supplemental aid. But what we really need to keep in mind is that this is just basic school funding, right? The reason why we do this bill every year is to make sure that schools are able to meet inflation, to keep up with other rising costs, and the fact of the matter is that for the last decade, these basic school increases that really are just the school's general fund aren't keeping up with that. And so this is something we need to keep working on. The proposal in the Senate, as Jack mentioned, is lower than the one that's in the House. What has been proposed in the House is 2.5%. What I and other House Democrats are proposing is at least 3%. It is what we proposed last year, and we'll keep pushing for. The difference in that dollar amount is instead of $94 million, it's $133 million. And I think, based on any number of things that have already been said about how we are in a really good budget place right now, there is no reason why we can't do 3%. It's again, basic school funding. And what we also know is that school districts across the state are telling us that basic inflation at this point is 3.75. So in some school districts, that's still not going to be enough. So anyway, that is my pitch. I think we should be doing more. But also speaking on education, something I want to mention for those of you who may not know, I was really privileged to serve on an interim committee. We met in December, and that was the School Funding Formula Review Committee. It meets every 5 years to kind of look over all of our different programs, how things are working, and make sure that, that we still have an equitable funding program. And there were a number of recommendations that I brought to the committee that fortunately there was actually unanimous agreement on how we need to be working on some of this stuff. And it's been kind of, a lot of it has been thought about over the last few years but hasn't moved anywhere, that I think we're actually going to finally get some movement on, which is really exciting. One of them is increasing what's called the weighting, and that's W-E-I-G-H-T, not waiting as in you have to wait. There's always confusion when I say waiting. To increase it for English language learners. The first ask for this increase was in the 2013 or 2014 meeting. We have a bill this session. I serve on the subcommittee for it. We just met earlier this week, and it looks like it'll be moving forward. I hope, fingers crossed, that we'll increase the weighting for English language learners and actually put them into 2 categories, but it will increase it from 0.22 for one category up to 0.3, and for the other one from 0.22 to 0.25. There is a lot of support for this in the education community, so it is my hope that we can get it on the House floor, or get it to committee soon, and then get it on the House floor, and I hope that our colleagues in the Senate will agree that this is a good idea. So that's one thing I'm very excited about. The other one is that we just passed out of committee a work group on special education. What I know from conversations with our Ankeny school folks, as well as Sadel, which I also represent, and other folks all around the state, special education runs at a deficit in basically every school district across the state every year. And schools are able to go to the SBRC, which I am blanking on what that stands for at the moment, to get that funding. So it shows up, but it comes out of property taxes, right? So every year we're having to get more for it. So this work group would look at how all of our special education is running, and also look at funding. So that passed out of committee. I hope we can get that on the House floor soon, and I also hope the Senate will take it up so we can get some movement on that. The one other thing that I wanted to mention is childcare. We talked about it a lot last year. It has been talked about a lot for a lot of years, but unfortunately without any movement. There is definitely a feeling in the legislature this session to do something in a number of things on childcare. So we're starting to see some movement there. I just do want to mention that this is a top priority of mine, as well as our House Democratic Caucus. And we have just released a plan with 4 big ideas focused on childcare. They are, just to list them, grants for startup or expansion of facilities, partnering with small businesses to provide care for employees, expanding access by raising the eligibility rate for child care assistance from 145% to 200% of poverty, and then also expanding the child care independent care tax credit. So I hope that we will get some movement on these bills. They are incredibly important for families across the state, because we know that affordability and accessibility is a problem no matter where you are in this state. So I'm excited for questions, and I'm just going to pass this along to Steve.
Thank you, Representative. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. My district is District 3, the Polk County Board of Supervisors. I represent Ankeny, Altoona, Bondurant, Mitchellville, Pleasant Hill, and a whole bunch of farm ground in between. But it really is my privilege, and I want to say thank you to the Chamber. I want to say thank you to Mark and Snyder and Associates, and to McGough. These kind of functions don't happen by accident. It takes people to be willing to step up to sponsor these types of events. I'll be brief, and I've got a whole bunch of different directions I want to go. First, I am up, every 4 years I'm up for re-election, and my name will be on the ballot for the primary the 2nd of June if I get enough signatures. And I'm going to ask Mark if he'll take these and put them on the table here. You're under no obligation. I'm just taking every opportunity to get signatures. Few things just quickly. You don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat. You don't, by signing this doesn't mean that you're obligating yourself to vote for me. You have to be 18 years or older, and you have to live within my district, and you don't have to have a voter registration card, and I will not ask for your driver's license. Okay. That was supposed to be funny. a
lot of disclaimers there.
Okay, yeah. I've been at Ankeny almost 53 years. And this is the 4th library that I've been in. 4. They just get bigger and better. Okay, so just a little historical note. The first library that I was associated with in Ankeny is now an office building that's across from, on Walnut, across from the Methodist Church. That was the first library. And they moved then, they outgrew it, believe it or not, and moved to where it is, where City Hall is now in Wagner Park. Kirkendall the Kirkendall brothers owned farm ground, and they willed it to the city of Ankeny to be used to pay for and maintain a library. So that's the Kirkendall Library name that continues to this day. City Hall then and the police station became part of the old library, and then they outgrew the library in Wagner Park, so that in 1996 there was a joint bond referendum with the school, and they built the middle school, which now is Prairie Ridge, and the library then was attached to that. And City Hall moved out of the police station, City Hall, into the old library, and the police station became the whole police station. And then, lo and behold, we were at 26,000 people when that library was built, and today, who knows how? You need a counter to kind of figure out how many, but it doubled. And my wife was I was just on city council, and my wife was on the library board, and she was very, very passionate about libraries and what they do, and the importance of making sure you've got programming for the entire family. One of the first places that families come when they want to come and see a town, they usually stop at the library, and that really is the visitor center. And what a great visitor center we have here. And I want to thank the city council and the mayor and for their vision, but I also want to thank all of you and your vision, because when there's no vision, we perish. And God knows we're not perishing in Ankeny, but it's because of your vision. And I want to thank each one of you. Give yourself a round of applause, please, because this is the fruits of our labor in believing in our community. So thank you very, very much for letting me ramble like that. Ramblers. Didn't American Motors make Ramblers? Never mind. I want to talk about, just really brief, the Polk County budget for this year. We have been seeing a lot of, if you do read the paper, there is some headlines about what Polk County thinks they're up to. One of the things that you're hearing about is there's a compensation board that's by state statute. Each one of the elected officials in Polk County or any county can appoint a member to the compensation board. Polk County Board of Supervisors has 2, the sheriff has 1, the auditor has 1, county attorney has 1, our recorder has 1. In all the time I've been on the Polk County Board of Supervisors, I've never had any input in one of those 2 people on the compensation board. I'm the minority. There's 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And no one has ever asked me, what do you think the compensation increase should be? They look at a number of other elements as well. They met about 3 weeks ago, and they recommended for the elected officials a 4.5% increase in our compensation. That would mean that if that passed, and it's connected to our budget, if it passes, we would get a $5,000 a year raise. Yay. I'm totally appalled that a compensation board would even think about doing that. It is appalling. This coming Tuesday at our board meeting, we will be voting on the compensation package, because 2 years ago, or was it last year, either way, the legislature said you have to pull that out and vote for that independent of your budget. Great thing, because it really has to be more transparent. In the past, it just kind of under the rug, and you didn't know because you don't look at page 297 of the budget. But even then, this has to pass by a simple majority. So it's 3-2. I will not be, the recommendation is going to be from my compatriots, a 3% increase. Now there's a binder here, because whatever increase the elected officials give themselves, that's the maximum that you can give to their deputies. So deputy sheriffs, deputy auditor, deputy, etc. That's all the increase. So the excuse is if we don't give ourselves 3%, we can't give them 3%. We need to separate that. We need to make sure the elected officials and their salaries are not tied to deputies. I think that's something we need to do and take a look at that. And I would welcome your consideration of that. I'll be voting no. I don't think we should get more than 2%. Our unions are getting 2.5% this coming year. And how can I give myself more than the on the streets people? It just doesn't make sense. Now, do I give it back? Do I say no, I'm not going to take it? It's more complicated than that. I give away 50% of my salary every year. I've won more trips at auctions than you can imagine, and I've never taken them. But I donate my money to, so I'm giving back my money. I don't need a pat on the back. My arm's not long enough, and yours isn't either. But here's something more. We're also going to be voting this coming Tuesday on setting our tax levy. And right now our tax levy is, the at issue is, I think it should be lowered. I think it should be substantially lowered, but Tuesday they're going to set the levy the same. Well, property tax evaluations have increased 7.5% from last year to 2019 that we'll be able to use for 2020. 7.5%. I could use a little French word here, but I will hesitate. I'll be voting no on that. Actually, I'll be voting yes because that sets the date for March 3rd, which is the date that then we set all the numbers for the budget that we certify on the 24th. If I vote no on March 3rd, which I will be voting no, then there will have to be a supermajority to override that. It'll take, because our increase is more than 2%, which again was set by the legislature, we have to have a supermajority. So I vote no, that means 4 others will have to vote yes. I'm counting on my Republican counterpart to vote no as well. It puts it into a supermajority. It puts it in a position where our budget cannot be approved without making some kind of concessions. I'm asking for a 21 cent per thousand decrease in our tax levy this year. That amount of money is pretty much equal to what the average assessed value has gone up. That's where I'm at, and by gosh, if you know any of the other supervisors, we need, and I yield my time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to all of you for your concise updates and your information. I would just say that all of these individuals are available for access all of the time at the state capitol. All of their information is readily available on how to get a hold of them to follow up with any of those points that they have raised. So do exercise that right as a citizen. Now we're going to start the Q&A session of our update, and I'm going to be drawing the order from the podium, as I mentioned, and doing a random drawing of the people who came in here. So we're just going to go ahead and shuffle these cards just like I do when I play poker. And here we go. All right. The first question that we have is from Audrey Hyatt. If you'd like to start going toward the mic over by Mark. It is Senate File number 308, SSB 1236, and wants to know the status of the bill. I would guess this would be addressed to Senator Whitver. And I would also, I'm going to draw another one right here so that the next person can get in line to get to the podium to save some time. And that would be John Hale asking about sales tax and income tax questions. So let's go ahead, and you have 1 minute, Audrey, to concisely state your question.
I'm a 40-year retiree under the Civil Service Retirement System. I provided care to our military men and women. A couple months before I retired, I became aware that Iowa provides 100% income taxation exclusion under Social Security. I didn't contribute to Social Security. I don't get Social Security because civil service was my Social Security substitute. But I get a 0, along with 13,000 other Iowans, get a 0% exclusion under Iowa taxation. We're asking for fairness as we are taxed. SF 308, Senate Study Bill 1236, introduced by Senator Zahn, Senator Feenstra, respectively, has been introduced. Where is the status of this bill? Senator Whitver, I provided what I could find on the legislative bill and highlight. I can't figure it out.
And Audrey, could you give us your address also?
My property is 1102 Oakwood Drive, Polk City, Iowa.
All right.
And I'm the state legislative liaison for NARF, and therefore I, on behalf of 13,000 Iowans who get civil service, I represent them.
Thank you for your question. Yes, go ahead. Let's have our answer.
As you can imagine, I don't know the status of every single bill that's filed just off the top of my head, so I don't know. I'm guessing right now it's just in the subcommittee process. When I talked about, and that means it's assigned to 3 people, and then they have to decide if 2 of them agree, it will go forward to the full committee and so forth. This, I believe, should be a Ways and Means bill, which means it is not subject to the funnel that I talked about. Right. So that deadline 2 weeks from now, tax bills do not apply to that. So I don't know off the top of my head. I can look into it and let you know, but it seems like a reasonable request.
Okay.
And that would be a follow-up question. Thank you, Audrey. We have John Hale next to the microphone, who's going to ask a question on sales tax and income tax, who will be followed by Jane Warren, asking from the Art Breakfast, I guess, the high cost of drugs. But John, please state your name, your address, and concisely your question in 1 minute.
My name is John Hale. My address is 422 Northeast 37th Lane, and my question as concisely as I can. Senator and representatives, you referenced the I Will bill, and thank you for doing that. I know it's a big bill with lots of moving parts. I guess I would ask just a general question. What are your views on that bill at this point in terms of what it's trying to do and how it's trying to do it? Secondly, more specifically, I know there's a debate about shifting mental health funding from property tax to income tax and some of the concerns there. What are your thoughts specifically on that? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
Specifically on the mental health part, I believe it's something we need to do. We have passed 2 major mental health bills the last 2 years. The first one with adult mental health last year was implementing a children's mental health system in Iowa for the first time ever. We've never had a children's mental health system, and so it's starting to build that from scratch. This is a year where they need more money to fund those programs, and it's a critical year for us to provide that funding. Right now, mental health is paid for by property tax. That's why the county is so involved. And I believe we want to try to shift that off of property taxes and back into the state general fund. If you look at the reason why we have one of the worst, or one of the highest property taxes in the country, you look at your bill, it's city, it's state, it's county, it's mental health, it's community colleges, and it's on and on and on. There's about 9 or 10 different things. So if you really want to impact property tax, one of the ways to do that is change what you're using property taxes for. There are very few states that use property tax to fund a social program like mental health services. And so drawing that off of property tax, I think, is a win-win, because we can provide more money, but we can also reduce property taxes. And so that will be a major focus this session. Whether the I Will package the governor passed or proposed passes or not, the mental health will be a big part of it.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Just in a nutshell, there is some resistance to the idea of raising sales tax in Iowa, and that comes from a basic distrust that we can follow through and provide the commensurate cuts in income tax so that it is a zero-sum increase or decrease, however you want to look at it. Governor said she would not sign a bill that didn't contain that. So it's a big issue for us to talk about. What we've looked at in the House is 2 things. One, doing the governor's plan, and we've had lots of talk about that and a 3/8 cents going to water quality. The other is, can we fund most of those issues without doing that? Put it on a 3-year glide path. It looks like we can. And we already have the income tax cuts scheduled for 2023 and 2024, depending on how the state budget continues to grow. Right now, everything's just working fine. It looks like we're headed for those cuts. The governor's plan would speed that up and make sure that those cuts happen earlier if we increase the sales tax. But we're also looking at the fact, can we do that income tax cut and not raise sales tax? For me personally, that's a preferred way. But there's a lot of services that are on the line here, and one is mental health, and we absolutely are committed that we're going to get something done on that that's meaningful. And I think the decision is yet to be made on how this is going to work out. I think it's the biggest topic in the legislature for us this year. Heather?
Thank you, and this is a really great and very important question. You know, the governor first mentioned this in her speech, which was now almost 4 weeks ago, and we just got the bill. Well, I got it late Wednesday, and it was it really filed yesterday. So I have not had a chance to go through it. It's 47 pages. But just as a frame of reference, I do have this printed out as section by section. There's 3 big main sections of it, and it's really huge. And I think that in any normal session, like just handling one of these things at a time, right, would be a really big thing to do. So I am, my own personal feelings are just that I'm very cautious about it, in part because I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but also because there are so many pieces in it. And I think that all of us, right, are cautious about it, just because it's a huge thing to talk about how much you're going to fundamentally change tax policy in the state, right? I mean, it's huge. And also, I will, and wanting to make sure that we are actually funding water quality and doing all of the things that the voters said that they wanted to do 10 years ago. And then mental health, top priority. We have to get something going on actually increasing funding. And one of the reasons that I'm cautious about this is I want to make sure that we're doing it right. And there is understandably a lot of conversation about whether or not mental health should be funded through property taxes or through another means. Totally understand that. One thing that can be said about funding it through property taxes is that it is sustainable. You know how much money, generally speaking, it's going to be from year to year, and you can kind of plan for that. If you take it out of property taxes and put it in the general fund, that can change from year to year depending on who's appropriating the money, and that is one of my biggest concerns. It's not about taking it out of property taxes that makes me nervous. It's about how it can change from year to year and not be sustainable anymore at a time when we are already not funding it at the rate that it needs to be. So I will want to make sure that whatever we have an opportunity to vote on is that the tax policy is fair for all Iowans, and that it's not just shifting money from one revenue stream to another revenue stream and not actually increasing the amount that we need to actually pay for all of these services. So that's where I'm at right now, and I'm really looking forward to digging in on this and being open-minded and hoping we can get something really positive done.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Just want to add one more thing for a point of information. Many of you will know this, but as this discussion about the IWIL plan goes forward and the governor's plan, you're going to hear about the formula a lot. And what that means is the constitutional amendment that was voted in 2010 said we're going to establish a trust fund, 3/8 of a cent will go into it. In Iowa's code, in state law, is what we call the formula. Where that money goes, $180 million roughly. So the formula is where that money actually goes, how it's spent. 10% here, 20% there, 40% there. The governor has proposed changes to it. I believe to get anything passed, we will have to change it. You know, it's been 10 years, maybe 11 years or so since that formula was written. A lot has changed at the time. Trails were a big, important thing back there. There weren't a lot of trails. There are a lot more now, so maybe we don't need as much money going into trails. Water quality has become a bigger issue. We might want more money going to water quality. And so, when we talk about why this is going to be a difficult bill, just changing the formula of how the $180 million is spent is a difficult process to get people on board and to get the votes needed in the House, Senate, and the governor on board. Our people have been working on that for 2 years just in case this discussion happens, and I think we're close, but we're still not there. So that's just probably the easiest part of this bill is figure out the formula, and that's why when we say it's difficult, that's why it's difficult.
I want to add one thing about property taxes. Originally, when I decided to run for office, it was the property tax issue here in Ankeny that compelled me to get up and do something about this. And I'm always in favor if we can take pressure off property taxes and make it more affordable for people to live here. It's the key to making Ankeny continue to grow. Not only for residential, but for commercial and for our farms across the state. We need to keep this under control. And I'm glad that Supervisor Van Oort talked about the pressure that Polk County is applying to our property taxes. I would point out that in the school funding and the growth that the Ankeny schools are not at their cap, their statutory cap, and they continue to lower their levy, as does the city. They're doing their job. They're doing a good job of that, of trying to control those expenses and applying that to the property tax owners. They could ask, they could get more. If they needed more, I think they would do that. But I feel I'm a partner with them in providing as much funding as we can out of state revenue so that the pressure isn't upward on Ankeny property taxes, it's downward. And if we could get Polk County to do that, it would be a win-win-win.
All right, well, a lot of questions and a lot of answers so far. We next have Jane Warren asking about the high cost of drugs, which might be a little more of a federal question, but we'll see. Also, I'm drawing now for Tony Ola to talk about data access, and please make your way toward the microphone to follow Jane. Jane, go ahead. 1 minute. Where are you from? Address and issue.
I'm from Ankeny, 401 Northwest Greenwood. I want to thank you very much all for the CARE Act last year. I'm a volunteer with AARP, and they will be having a breakfast this upcoming Wednesday, so coffee and donuts if you'd like to swing by at the Capitol, 9 o'clock. Love to have you. And I know Senator Grassley has done some things already for the high cost of drugs, but a friend of mine this week, 92 years old, she got a new heart medication, over $600 a month. There is no way she can pay for it or have insurance. You know, is there anything being done at the state level, because the cost of drugs is horrendous?
Thank you for your question. Let's see what our dialogue is.
Okay. It is a big topic of conversation. It's mostly a federal issue, and Senator Grassley has worked very hard on it. The president's been working very hard on it. As you guys know, Congress has a hard time agreeing on almost anything, and so even though they both agree we need to fix it, it's more difficult to get done than it should be. We're doing what we can. We're looking into options at the state level.
You are.
It's hard just because it is such a federal issue, and it's really hard to sort out who's to blame, because you have insurance companies pointing at the drug companies pointing at the PBMs pointing at the insurance companies saying it's their fault, and PBMs the pharmacy benefit managers, and it's really hard to figure out who really is to blame. But I know there's a lot of conversation when we do surveys of constituents. Healthcare is always the top issue. And everyone has different opinions on it, but everyone is concerned about healthcare, and drug price is a big one. So we're looking into any options we can do at a state level, but again, mostly it's federal.
Okay, thank you.
Jane, I don't know if I can really add a lot to this conversation, but I want to tell you an experience I had that points to exactly the magnitude of this problem. My wife and I had a chance to be in Mexico right at the beginning of the year. I normally don't get to go to Mexico, but it was a very enlightening experience. And they have pharmacies all over down there, and they list all the drugs that they carry right on a chalkboard out front. Things that here require a doctor's visit, a prescription, sometimes a physical, to blood draws and things to identify what the issues are. Down there, you just simply walk in and get what you think you need, and they advertise their 85% discount to U.S. prices. So I think, okay, well, who's all there? Now you have the Canadians, they have a national health care system, and we think, well, we should go to Canada if we could just get drugs at Canadian prices. The Canadians are down there buying it.
Wow. Wow.
So it tells you the magnitude of the problem. I don't know that we can add much at the state level, but we certainly support and want to do anything we can to try and help straighten out this healthcare issue of drug supply and cost.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just echo that there is very little we can do at the state level. But that being said, we did pass a bill out of Human Resources a couple weeks ago that puts caps on how much you have to pay for insulin. And unfortunately, it's also very specific to only certain plans and all of that because, again, so much of insurance is federal insurance plans. So we're really trying to, at least I can speak for House Democrats, we are trying to find ways that we, like literally my question to some of my colleagues when the session first started is, what can we do? Is there anything we can do? So we're trying to figure out what those things are and work on that, but keeping in mind that unfortunately it's whatever we can do is probably only going to affect a very small percentage of the population because of very specific state plans as opposed to everybody. So we'll keep working on that. It's a huge priority of mine in general, so I hope we can do something.
And Jane, I would strongly recommend you get in touch with our senior Senator Grassley because he is leading the way on that at the federal level. So we'll have one last question from Tony Vola on data access, name, address, and question.
Tony Vola, 5713 Northeast 9th, that's in Saylor Township. Representative Landon, in your last newsletter, you talked about a study that's being looked at when it comes to mostly operating systems, if I understood it correctly. Senator Whitver, you talked about the attempted audit of the MCOs and the data and the non-congruence, I guess, of data to really look at things. So my question is, if we're doing a study, if we're looking at modernizing technology, which I hope that goodness we are, is the discussion going to include giving the ability for me to go online and trace dollars in, dollars out, find out exactly where they're going? And just for curiosity's sake, I'm curious if Mr. Van Oort knows how much money he would save if we'd automate it, not having to put all that fine print in the paper after every meeting and everything.
Well, there's a lot in your question there, and I'll just address state technology from about 30,000 foot level if I can. So right now, well, last year in my budget subcommittee, and we appropriate the money for the Department of Revenue among many others, and it became apparent that that is the #1 spot in state government that needs upgraded as fast as we can do it, because all of you require confidence that as you pay your tax dollars that you're paying the correct amount, that it's going to the right person or the right department, and that when they compute if there is an overpayment and a refund, that it actually goes to you and you get it back, and that your information is kept confidential and not hacked. And so that department gets so many attempts at grabbing those refunds before they get to the right person. And we have identified that as the weakest link in the system, or the one that, not necessarily the weakest, but the one that needs to be working every day without fail, no exceptions. And so the director we appropriated a little over $1 million to do a study to find out, first of all, what kind of vendor is out there, what kind of package is there, and let's not reinvent the wheel. Right now they have 22 separate operating systems to do the one function of income tax in the state and sales tax. All that combined takes 22 different operating systems to keep going. Some are relatively new, some were put in place back in the 80s, and it's still there, still plugging away. So to do that whole project, it looks like it's about $90 million. Now, just as a reference, as I told the revenue director, to go from Ore Labor to 36th Street, to widen it to 3 lanes each way, to bridge 4 Mile Creek, and to put a whole new intersection at 1st Street was $54 million. So how can something like this cost $90 million? So we get this long, long list of all the things and how Indiana just did this, and there's 9 million people in Indiana and 3 million people in Iowa. Why would we buy a system for 9 million people? But the point is, whether it's 70 million or 80 million or 90 million, the number is staggering. And that's just one department. Department of Administrative Services, same thing. That's another one that I take care of in my budget. And they are asking for an upgrade. And then, once we got all those identified, along comes the Department of Human Services, an OMG. They need 54 million immediately just to upgrade what they have, and the system that they want to upgrade is hideously out of date. So we've got a long way to go, and the governor stepped in and said, stop. We're going to do the Department of Revenue, but we're going to take a look at the technology needs statewide. We're trying to buy package systems so that we're not having to completely custom program for each department. We're looking at what other states have done, and can we buy a system off of their already existing contract so we don't have to renegotiate and go through that whole process, and trying to look at every efficiency that we can drive into that. There's an Office of Chief Information Officer at the state. Ann Dunn is the director. She's relatively new. Every time we get a really high quality director, along comes Facebook or somebody and hires them because they're really good. And she is really good. She is really smart and does a great job. She was the DOT technology director that did the online live system of you can track a snowplow and you can see what they're spreading on the road live time anywhere in the state. And she's bringing that kind of technology experience into all of state government. And so the future looks bright. We're gonna have a lot to talk about as we go down the road, but the amount of money I'm not sure we're prepared for. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd be happy to give it to my colleagues here.
We're just about close to time, so make anything short.
I was going to say, I don't have anything on that, but I just have one other thing in general I want to make sure I say before we leave. But if you have anything else on this topic.
We're late. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just I'll totally take what John said there because that is not something I know a ton about, so thanks for that, John. But just wanted to reiterate, since we are running out of time, I know there are a lot of folks that would love to come to stuff like this and can't necessarily come during the week. And so I do want to mention something that I have coming up. Saturday, February 15th at 11 a.m., I do have a listening post at Cafe DM. So please feel free to let friends and neighbors know that I will be doing that. And I also want to make sure folks know that I have weekly office hours every Friday morning during session from 9 to 10:30 a.m. at Main Street Cafe. So please feel free to stop by and see me anytime. And final thing on school funding, we are expecting to debate that in the Iowa House on Monday night. That is the latest information I got. So for anyone who this is an issue that's important to them, please keep an eye out for that.
All right, and I think we're going to go ahead and call a close to comments. I would just offer that all of these individuals are available to you full time. They take their responsibilities seriously, have equal access by all of you. You're all involved and interested in political issues, substantive policy issues. Let's go ahead and use the system of contact and give and take. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance today.